In this session, you will learn to connect the dots of a varied career history. Let's talk some examples of why it is you would have a varied work history. Sometimes there's a shift in interest. Perhaps a professional starts off in sales or marketing, but decides to move into an operational leadership role or head into IT. Perhaps an individual has decided that an entrepreneurial opportunity at some point seemed of interest. They left the workforce to pursue that and are now coming back in. Family business, maybe you started a brand new career, lots of different reasons that you might have a varied work history and need to be able to address that shift of focus on your resume. So how do we do that? Number one, you want to maintain a posture of control. It's always important that you're representing your career as something that you have active control over and that you have made definitive decisions about. So even when those decisions were out of your hands, such as a reduction in force chose you to leave a particular role, you always want to be able to reflect that you very quickly resituated yourself, came back rejuvenated, and decided to shift your focus and move in a direction that served you greater. A skills-focused executive summary, meaning that you have indicated the specific hard skills, areas of interest, core competencies, and you focused on these heavily in the executive summary, sometimes with additional detail, and we'll see an example of that shortly, can be a way to address that shift. You may also choose to remove dates from the initial entry or to use non-traditional section headers. When doing these last two, you have to watch out for that applicant tracking software system. You may actually need to create a traditional version of the document for any online applications and save that combo format for person-to-person submissions. So let's talk about what these look like in actuality. First, the example of a skills-focused executive summary. You can see here that we've broken out 5 of the core skills this individual needs in order to pursue their position in financial management. We've called out each of these skills and not simply listed them in a core competencies table, but rather actually indicated and defined a little of the accomplishments and the scope that they had inside of each one of these roles: financial management, analysis, cost accounting, operations, regulatory compliance, and so forth. This is what I mean by really having a skills-focused executive summary. It's going to take up more space than a traditional summary, but really make sure that we're shining those achievements before getting into the specifics of where you actually worked when these took place. Another tip is around removing dates from the initial entry. We can see here in this sample that rather than specifically stating the timeline up front, we have just indicated that this person is a case manager and psychological rehabilitator, and that's come first since that's likely the space he or she would like to step into or continue in. And then we've also noted that they served as a server and bartender for a winery. Now, once I get down to the timeline, I can actually see that these are in chronological order, which is the opposite of we'd typically see. They've had a gap since they served as that case manager, but since they'd like to step back into that role, it was again showcased first. From a visual perspective, this is pulling me in to your strongest accomplishments, to your area of interest, and then, and only after I've read about those accomplishments, actually bringing up the tidy advice of the fact that this timeline means that I've served as a bartender more recently than as a case manager. And finally, I mentioned the use of non-traditional section headers. So rather than a section header that's called work experience, here we've decided to group together this individual's account and project management experience, likely because they're looking to get into either of these fields. I think from my recollection, this person was an account manager, and we want to showcase those positions. Again, notice there are not dates associated because we are taking things out of the order that they happened in. We're representing this information first, immediately following the executive summary, and then after this section, we would showcase, again, either the timeline or perhaps call a section career chronology and list the specific titles, dates, and companies that you worked for. So we're still giving the employer what they need to see, the actual career history of what happened when, but the focus of the attention on page 1 is really around your achievements in these specific spaces. Thank you so much for joining us. Visit our blog to access our learning library and free downloads.